sono Furio Giunta.
Oh, hey, how are you? Piacere.
Piacere.
There is a specific feeling most Sopranos fans have about Furio that is hard to put into words.
Che cazzo l'ha detta a te? Per faticare con noi, aveva fa così, eh?
He is violent, he barely speaks, and he spends 3 seasons as a supporting character who never takes over the main story. He should be someone you forget, but he is not, and most people who have seen this show know exactly what I mean. I have watched The Sopranos more times than I can count, and for most of those watches, I watched Furio the same way I think most people do. The scary guy, the dangerous one, the man you do not want to see coming, the one worthy of the real strong silent type title. Tony goes to Naples, finds this terrifying enforcer, brings him back to New Jersey, and Furio proceeds to make every collection scene feel genuinely dangerous, which, honestly, is more than enough to make him memorable. Then I went back and watched his first scene again, properly, and something bothered me.
May I help you? Ow! What are you doing? Ah! Ah!
This man does not look angry for even a second. He is tearing through that place, hitting everyone in sight, shooting the owner in the knee, and his face barely changes. At first I assumed that just meant he was a psychopath, which felt like a reasonable enough conclusion. But the more I watched it, the less that made sense. Because we have seen Paulie lose his temper, and we have seen Tony lose his temper, and Chris, well, Chris is missing a few brain cells.
Scarface, final scene, fucking bazookas under each arm, say hello to my little friend.
Anger is how most of these men prove they are serious. Furio just walks in, completes the job, and leaves. And once I started looking at him that way, I could not stop. Because the stillness is control, and Furio feels everything the people around him feel, he just hides it better than any of them. And the moment I understood that, his whole story changed. The thing that makes Furio genuinely unusual in Tony's world is how complete he is as a person outside of the job. He can cook, he can dance, he works with his hands, he talks openly about missing home without it reading his weakness, he tends his garden, and he cares for his father. Most of Tony's crew slowly shrink into their role until everything they are is money, status, insults, and stories about the old days. Furio still has a self underneath the job. The mafia has not consumed all of him, and that is actually rarer in that world than people give it credit for. I'd barely paid attention to Furio going back to Italy for his father's funeral. It felt like a brief pause in the story. He leaves, pays his respects, comes back to New Jersey, and everything continues exactly as before. It was not until I sat with those scenes properly that something clicked. Because for the first time in the whole show, Furio does not feel like Tony's enforcer, or the Italian, or even really like a gangster. He just feels like a man saying goodbye to his father. And seeing him like that recontextualized everything that came before it. He had been emotional the entire time. He had just been extraordinarily good at hiding it. When Furio comes back to New Jersey after the funeral, everything is exactly where he left it. Same streets, same crew, same morning routine. But every time I watch those episodes now, I get this strange feeling, like Furio is seeing America for the first time, or maybe seeing what he had been ignoring all along. There is a version of Furio that Tony imported purely as a weapon. That version is real. He is violent when the job requires it, loyal when loyalty is expected, and contained enough that he never becomes a liability. Tony got exactly what he wanted. What Tony did not account for is what happens to a person when you take them from everything they have ever known and place them inside a colder version of the same life. Back home, Furio had family, language, food, history, and roots. New Jersey gives him Tony's crew and an apartment he fills with carefully chosen things. He buys a house and works on it with his own hands, plans a space for his parents, thinks about growing grapes, and remembers a different version of himself. Tony brought Furio to America because he saw a weapon. A man who could walk into a room, do what needed doing, and leave without making it personal. That is exactly what he got. What Tony never considered is that the same qualities that made Furio so useful as an enforcer, the discipline, the control, the ability to feel something without letting it drive the decision,
Non ti preoccupare, non ti preoccupare.
were also the qualities that would eventually make him impossible to keep. Carmela sees those qualities too. She just sees them differently. Tony looks at Furio and sees a weapon that works. Carmela looks at Furio and sees a person who is actually present. In her marriage, those two things have not existed in the same man for a long time.
Just me, I worked there alone, growing olives. My hands in the dirt. I was never so happy in my life as when I worked at that place.
That is probably the most honest thing anyone says in the entire show. His happiest memory is not a robbery, a promotion, or the fear on someone's face. It is growing something alone in the sun. Everything since then has been moving away from that feeling, and somewhere inside Tony's best enforcer is a man who still knows exactly what he lost. I think Carmela represents something very specific to Furio, and I do not think it is what most people assume. Their scenes are almost suspiciously ordinary. She brings him coffee, they talk about the house, he asks what she thinks, and he actually listens to the answer. It is so quiet and domestic that the first time I watched it, I kept waiting for something dramatic to happen. It never does. And now I think that is exactly the point. Because what Furio starts falling in love with is not Carmela, it is the feeling of being around her. He can talk about gardens, family, memory, and home without anyone treating it as weakness. Around the crew, showing genuine feeling is either comedy or vulnerability. Around Carmela, he can exist without performing his job for even a few minutes. She gives him access to the part of himself the life has been slowly burying, and she does it without even realizing that is what she is doing. For a man in his position, that is more dangerous than any weapon. And Carmela responds to him for a reason that is just as specific. Tony has spent years reducing her needs to objects. A ring after betrayal, a fur coat after guilt, a new car when the silence between them gets too loud. His gifts arrive when he needs to manage her, not because he sees her. There is a version of caring in Tony that is real, but it almost always comes packaged with control or obligation or the unspoken expectation that she should be grateful enough to stop asking questions. Furio asks what she thinks and actually waits for the answer. He listens without calculating what the answer will cost him. He treats her presence as something worth paying attention to rather than something he is entitled to. Carmela later admits that Furio made her feel like she mattered, and that is the exact thing Tony had quietly stopped giving her years before she could name it. I was genuinely wrong about what I was watching for most of the series. I thought the Furio and Carmela storyline was building toward an affair. Looking back at it now, I was watching the wrong story. Every scene is really about Furio making the same decision over and over again, staying quiet, holding still, understanding exactly what acting on this would cost everyone involved. Furio is clear-eyed enough to see that even while wanting it. The thing about his father's funeral is that it is also when Furio finally admits this out loud. He speaks to his uncle and says he is in love with his boss's wife. His uncle gives him the only honest answer available. This ends with Tony dead or Furio stays away from Carmela. He already knew the answer before he said it out loud. Having to say it to another person makes it real in a way it had not been before. And he still goes back. He returns to New Jersey anyway. And I think that is important. He understands the math. He goes back because leaving would mean giving up the only person who has made America feel like somewhere worth being, and for a while he tells himself he can manage it. He cannot. The helicopter scene is very interesting. We see Tony is drunk and the blades are spinning. Furio grabs him near the aircraft and there is this moment where everything is possible. Just one push and both him and Carmela would be free. But he stops. For years I assumed he stopped because of loyalty, old school values, respect for the institution. But I do not think that is it. I think he stops because he knows what happens to a man who kills to get what he wants. He has watched Tony for years, watched what desire dressed up as business does to a person. Pushing Tony would solve the problem in front of him and make him into something he cannot come back from. And of all the things Furio has managed to hold on to inside this life, that is the one he is not willing to lose. He pulls Tony back from the blades.
What you doing? I'm standing too close.
By the next morning, he is gone. The departure has to be sudden, and I think that is actually right, even if it stings when you watch it. A goodbye to Carmela would reopen everything. Another week would mean another morning at the door, another coffee, another moment where the decision almost makes itself differently. He leaves while he still can. And there is real courage in that. Vito ran to New Hampshire, built the beginning of something real, and went back because ordinary life felt smaller than the power he once had. Even after finding something that looked like happiness, the pull of what he used to be was stronger. Christopher saw the exit multiple times across 6 seasons and chose Tony's approval over his own freedom every single time. Adriana told Christopher the truth about the FBI, hoping they would escape together, and Christopher chose Tony over her. Bobby stayed loyal to the very end because loyalty was the only identity he had that felt clean, and he died in a model train store on a Sunday afternoon buying something for himself. These are people who convinced themselves they could have both sides of the coin, the life and something real inside it, power and peace. The mafia and a version of themselves they could still respect. What they never accepted is the thing Furio finally accepted, standing next to those helicopter blades. You cannot have both. The longer you pretend otherwise, the more it costs you and everyone around you. Tony makes his threat from across the ocean. He tells Carmela that Furio is finished if certain people find him. Tony needs that to be true because Carmela has just admitted that another man made her feel alive while Tony was beside her, and there is nothing Tony can do about it. Furio is beyond his reach. The threat is the only weapon left. The show never confirms anything happened. That matters. The Sopranos almost always shows you the consequence. The bullet, the arrest, the body, the final humiliation. With Furio, it refuses. He disappears beyond the edge of Tony's control, and the story just lets him stay there. I used to find that unsatisfying. Now I think it is the kindest thing the show does for any of its characters. Because Furio's ending is not a victory. I want to be clear about that. He loses Carmela. He loses the house he was building. His father is dead. He goes back to Italy carrying regret and probably does for years. He may spend a long time wondering what could have been different, and I think the honest answer is nothing. The situation was impossible from the moment Tony walked him onto that plane to New Jersey. But there is a difference between a good ending and the right ending. A good ending in this show would mean winning something, getting the girl, taking over, escaping clean. Furio does not get any of that. What he gets is the ending he can still live with. He chose grief over becoming someone he no longer recognized. He chose loss over the version of himself that would have pushed Tony into those blades and called it justice. Most characters in The Sopranos respond to an impossible situation by dragging everyone around them into the collapse. They cannot leave, so they pull. They cannot stop, so they keep going until something external stops them for good. Furio does something almost no one else in this show manages. He stops himself before the worst version of him becomes permanent, before the damage becomes irreversible. He packs, sells the house, and goes. After watching 6 seasons of people who could not do that, watching one person manage it feels like something genuinely worth appreciating. The first time I saw Furio, I thought he was the scariest man in any room he entered. Now I think I was watching someone trying to hold on to the last thing nobody had taken from him yet, and maybe that is why his story ends so quietly. Because sometimes leaving before the worst version of yourself arrives is the bravest thing a person can do. Even if no one in the room notices. Even if you get nothing for it. Even if the only reward is the distance between you and what you almost became. Furio packs his things and goes, and in a show where almost nobody gets to choose their ending, that is everything.